Let's take a look at a project that will illustrate the use of constructors. We can call our application Constructors. Visual Studio will create that for us. And here we have the class program, which has our static method main. We could put our new class in the same file, but let's turn to the project and say that we would like to add a class. That brings up the Add New Items, and we'll call our new class Employee. The first thing I want to do is make that class public. An employee is going to have a couple properties. The first will be of type integer, and that will be years of service. How long has this employee worked at this firm? And the second, which will also be an integer, is going to be the number of this employee's office. So that's our employee class. We're not going to give it a default constructor, but we will give it an explicit constructor. The constructor name is the same name as the class, so in this case employee, and our constructor is going to take two integers, one each for years of service and for the office. And notice that the parameters do not have to match the property names. As you can see, we're going to assign the parameters to the properties. With that class in place, let's save that and go back to our program. And in main, we can instantiate an employee object, which we'll call EMP. And we'll make that a new employee object. Remember, the constructor requires two parameters. You can see that below. The first one is years of service, and the second one is the office. So we'll enter that. We can now write out the employee's years of service using our string interpolation, which allows us to put right into those curly braces, emp for the object, and then years of service for the property. Let's have a second write line, and this time it will be for the employee's office. With those in place, we've created a new employee, sent the values into the constructor, and written out the values. Let's run that. And as we would expect, the output shows the years of service and the office with the values inserted. That's definitely one way to work with our employee class, giving it an explicit instructor. Another thing that we can do is we can use the default constructor to create our new employee and then assign values to the properties of that employee. The properties are public. So we first construct an empty employee using the default constructor, and then we assign the office. Now at this point you're probably thinking, well, we don't have a default constructor because we had an explicit constructor, and that's absolutely right. And if we try to build this, we'll get build errors because we don't have that default constructor. So let's return to the employee class and give it a default constructor, and that is as easy as creating a method with no return value in the name of the class and no parameters. And for now, we're not going to have that default constructor do anything, but of course what that will allow is the creation of an employee with no parameters. And we see that with employee 2. Let's copy down the write lines so that we can see the values in employee 2, and let's just quickly update the name of the object to emp2, and now we're ready to run this with our second version, which uses the default constructor and then assignment. And you can see that this works just as well as having an explicit constructor. There is another way to do this when you have a default constructor. Much like the one above, we say new employee paren, but this time we open up braces. And we're going to initialize the values of the properties inside those braces. We put a comma between the properties, and then at the end, at the closing brace, we put a semicolon. So this is yet another way to work with your employee class. We're using the default constructor and, in this case, initialization. Let's set up our write line to display employee 3 and run the application. And you can see, as expected, we get the years of service and the office that were initialized with the default constructor.